everybody. This is Pete Cossaboon. I'm here for the brand new show, Pushing the Edge from Project Positive Change. Today, we're going to be talking about embracing your inner Trump, really talking about finding your shadow self. You know, the idea is that if something in someone else or someone else triggers something in you, or triggers something, then that means it's triggering something in you. So what we're going to be doing is really talking about trying to find what that is, you know, that for instance, Trump is really triggering in a lot of people today. This isn't really a show where we're really trying to come up with a lot of answers. We're really trying to kind of come up with a lot more questions. So joining me is going to be my co-host, Cara Andershock, also a Project Positive Change visionary. Let her kind of introduce herself and tell us who she is and what we're going to be talking about today. Cara, how you doing?
Hi, great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
And let me just tell you a little bit of background on myself and then tell you a little bit more about what I do and how it fits into this conversation we're having today. I had this seemingly amazing life, right? I was in corporate. The last 20 of my corporate was at a pharmaceutical industry where I was making, six-figure salary, beautiful house, stock options, bonuses, traveled the world, was in a 13-year relationship, and yet something was missing. And when I realized that something that was missing was me, and I went on my own self-initiated journey and started to look at myself and what was going on. There was all of this discontent within me, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where it stemmed from. I just knew that I had to get out. I had to get out of my relationship. I had to get out of my job. I had to make some significant changes and put myself first. And that set me on this course of the bullet train, really, of personal transformation. I went to Barbara Brennan's School of Healing, which is a world-renowned 4-year healing school, graduated from that, Reiki master teacher, graduated from a 3-year shaman program, and studied soul retrieval with Sandra Ingerman, went to a 2-year interfaith seminary, graduated from One Spirit as an ordained minister. I had many teachers and mentors throughout. And most recently, I started to take some classes around Psych K, which is really looking at the subconscious and getting us into a whole brain state of looking at our limited beliefs and how they hold us back. And so I have a healing practice in North Raleigh, North Carolina. I do both in-person and distant healing work. And I would say, if I had to sum it up, I focus on folks that are stressed, sick, and stuck. And I help facilitate them to move them in a new direction of healing and wholeness. Okay, now I'm stuck.
No, you're doing great. So really kind of what, we're talking today about, embracing your inner Trump. That's our very first show. This is our first show. So y'all kind of forgive us as we kind of get things started here, really embracing or really discovering your shadow self. So, I think you certainly have lots of qualifications of that. So tell me some of the different feelings that have come up for you when you think of the word Trump. And like I say, I want to make sure people understand that this isn't really like we're trying to really even bash Trump so much. It's just that we're trying to find those issues today that people are really talking about and really helping people in their own personal growth. And like I say, if there's something that bothers you about somebody else, it's because you're noticing it in yourself. Well, it's coming up in yourself, whether you're noticing it or not. What we're trying to do is make you notice it. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. There's all of this knowing that we're all interconnected. So if we're all interconnected, if it's in one of us, it's in all of us, right? There can't be this duality and this separateness, although our conscious mind wants us to go there, right? And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind so that we have a foundation to talk on. Like you said, this is not a Trump bashing. This is about looking at ourselves so that we can actually raise the consciousness of the world. And we can only do that by exploring our own subconscious. I think it was Carl Jung that said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and you'll call it fate. And I just
Mm.
love that because it's the truth, right? If you think of our conscious and our subconscious as a iceberg, and only 5% of that iceberg is actually showing, and 95% of it is actually underwater. So if you're looking at the surface of the water, you just see that 5%. And that's how we function and focus in the world. People only see what they see and what we choose to allow them to see, right?
Mm.
In us.
Right.
And so people usually put on their good face, their front, their mask, let's say, of being nice and polite and so forth. But under that is the subconscious. But the conscious is, like I said, only about 5%, and it's limited, very limited processing. If you think of a computer, it's only about 40 bits per second that we can process in our conscious mind. And it can only handle 1 to 3 events, short-term memory, and it's the processor of rationalization, right, and duality. You know, things are usually right, wrong, good, bad, positive, negative, us versus them. It operates in duality. Now,
Mm.
the subconscious is more like the hard drive of the computer. It's your long-term memory. It's memory that you don't even remember that you have. Everything is kept in this file. Yet the subconscious processes at 40 million bits per second, whereas I said before, the conscious is only 40 bits per second. So when you look at that, you can see how it can process so fast. And the subconscious processes in neutrality. It doesn't see things as good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just what is.
Mm.
And so when we tap into it, that's what runs these programs that are our beliefs, our habits, our patterns, our behaviors that just run on autopilot.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we desire to have a whole brain state, right, of working with the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, the logical reasoning side and the creative, intuitive side. And only when those are working together can we really bring our true, authentic self out into the world.
Right, because I think what's really happening is that we're finding, there's such division right now I'm going to say, I'm not just going to put it in America, I'm going to put it really kind of across the world. I'm sure that, because we're Americans, we see it only happening here, but I'm sure it's happening really everywhere. And what that does is it really, it divides people, and we can't ever find a consensus where we can even come together and find those common goals that we have and those common objectives to where we can really, move forward, with what we want to do to really bring more life and happiness to everyone. And, there's a lot of people out there that really kind of think that that's kind of a mechanism that has really been put into place so that we can be sort of unmindful of what's going on, while behind the stage there are others, pushing forward their agendas. And whether or not that's true, I don't know. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories, but the whole idea is, who's really at play, who's really being conscious of what really is going on in the fuller aspect of it. And until we can really get out of the way or let those things, move aside from what is really what's the idea of taking our focus away, I guess, from what our real objectives are, and that, I think that's really what we're talking about here is being more mindful of what it is that we want to really be, give our attention to, do you know what I mean? So that we can, and so we made some really kind of basic ideas of the different things, at least for you and I, that we saw that the idea when we say Trump triggers, for each of us, and I think it'd be kind of interesting to sort of go through those in sort of a bullet point and really talk about how, we see that really, happening.
Yeah.
One of them
Can I
is,
just add one thing, Pete?
please.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things about the subconscious mind is it's developed between the age of conception to the age of 12 years old. And then we become socialized after that, and it gets beaten out of us for at that point in time, and we become socially acceptable kind of people. But when these children, especially before the age of 7, they're in a brainwave state that's called theta. And that's why children can learn like 3 different languages, play 4 different instruments, that they have this capacity. And you've heard the saying, you know, children are like sponges. Well, they are, because they are taking everything in from the environment, and it's building the foundation of their beliefs that they are going to carry through the rest of their lives. So that's really profound, that we have our beliefs and our patterns and our habits and things of that nature already hard on our hard drive by the age of 12. And in Brennan, you know, just thinking from a healer perspective, filters on the chakras, the energy centers that take in and metabolize energy, the filters aren't even on until the age of 7. So children are really letting everything in. And that's why it's really important around any kind of trauma, or these video games or horror movies and things of that nature are so influential on small children, is because they don't have the capacity to filter it out. They take it in as reality. So,
and I don't think we're really taught to, it brings up the book, you know, the 4 agreements. I don't think we're really ever taught how to move past that. You know, so many people are sort of stuck in that adolescent stage of allowing the subconscious programming to really kind of run the whole show. And, you know, I think it's really about, you know, developing that and really, you know, looking at things from what I would call a universal mindset, and seeing like, you know, what are the other possibilities of looking at, you know, the world at large, and even reality. But what is that, you know, so that you can, you know, begin to implement new things, you know, because it brings back the old idea of you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different, you know, outcome. And so many times it's just about looking at things in a different way and realizing the opportunities that are sitting right there in front of you. Because, you know, really anybody that's ever been successful, and however you define success, they all have 24 hours a day. They're all here on earth right here with us. And, you know, any great success story has some kind of a challenge that has been, you know, applied to it. And so I would say that if you take any challenge that you're currently facing, you can find the story of someone who's gone through that challenge and gone through and created an opportunity out of it, and created whatever you term as success. I you know, I try not to say like success is this, because it really is whatever you define it as. But it really, I think, really hinged upon that moment where they went perhaps through the dark night of the soul, and that moment where they had that enlightenment of, there's another way. Or maybe they made the conscious decision of, I won't live like this anymore, and just, you know, searching the truth. And that's the big thing for me here is not, like I say, finding necessarily the answers, but asking the right questions.
yeah, absolutely. And the fact that the subconscious runs the show, you know, just looking back at some of these politicians and preachers that have been on TV condemning things right and left, right? Like adultery, prostitution, homosexuality. The next thing you know, bam, it's all over the news that they've been exposed, that they've found some tapes, or their calendar had listings in it, you know. So that whole Shakespeare thing, you protest too much, right? Like it's, those are the pieces that are subconscious, that they don't even know that are running it. But whenever, like you said, whenever there is this huge amount of resistance or anger or frustration, it's usually because you hate that in yourself. There's something in you that it's triggering that you don't like about yourself. And I think that is the jewel in this conversation with Trump. He is obviously triggering shit in us that we don't want to acknowledge.
Right.
And the only way that we can shift it and shift the consciousness of the world is by doing our own work, doing our own personal work, and looking at where is this in me, and transform it on that level, and then we can have an impact on the whole collective consciousness.
Absolutely. It's almost like we're using him as like a scapegoat. We're using him as a way to take away our own guilt is the wrong word, but take away our own collusion in it, and make it to where like he's all the bad guy and we're the victims. Because when you create that victimhood state for yourself, there's nowhere for you to go from there. You simply are the victim. But as soon as you realize that, no, I will have victory one way or the other, then you can move into a whole new state, and you can start. It brings back to mind the part in your brain that decides what you focus upon and what you actually see. The reticular activating system. And if you see yourself in that victimhood mode, the only points of data that come into your brain are points of data that correlate to being a victim. You know what I mean? So you don't even have those facts to use in your brain center. You don't even have that data that you can use to process to take you from, where you are to a state that you want to be. But when you realize that the possibility of there is victory in here, there are opportunities, then you can start to actually see them, because, your reticular activating system, kind of like the subconscious, the reticular activating system puts no value on anything. It simply thinks, well, they're thinking this, that must be important. So, and so that's really kind of, I think, what we're trying to get to is the idea that it's almost like I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and it was something that I used to do, back when I was in my alcoholic stage and depression and all that stuff. I used to feel like if I focused on my fears, I would find a way to overcome them. But what I was doing was I was writing a prescription for how I wanted my life. I mean, you could literally write a script of my life by my fears. Absolutely. And so I was having this conversation with this woman, telling her that there was another way to be, but she was so afraid to let go of that grip of focusing on her fears, for feeling that she would lose control and not be able to really be able to handle the bad things that came her way. But if you focus on bad things coming to you, that's pretty much what happens. So what we're asking is for people to take the opportunity to perhaps look inward and be okay with the fact that the outward's going to be all right, especially as you find new things in yourself and you forgive whatever it is you're holding against others within yourself, and it creates a whole new reality for you, and therefore for the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. I mean, it's such a more powerful place to be than in victim mode, right? Where you're actually then, co-creating your life and moving it forward. And that's where we want to get to. And just in the consciousness as well, which is, the topic of our conversation today, of really moving that. And the other thing, which may be a topic for another discussion, is the power of the word, the words that we use to describe our life, who we are, what we're going through, what our circumstances are. One of the things with the Trump that just makes me cringe is there's like these campaigns and Facebook things that have out there the word resist, like campaign resist Trump. Well, there is absolutely no power, no movement, no flow in the word resist. It's more of this, teenager saying, you can't make me, right? It has no power in it. There's no movement forward for co-creation. So people out there who are working on these campaigns, I would really encourage you to change the name from resist, because what we resist persists, right? So, there's just so much with the power of the word that we can really shift some things. I remember a quote that Mother Teresa in the Vietnam War, they wanted her to go to a anti-war rally, and she said, no, I will not go to an anti-war rally, but I would go to a pro-peace rally. And I find that so empowering. And you could see it in they shifted from anti-abortion, now they do pro-life, right? somebody who's doing the marketing there or behind the scenes knows what they're doing, right?
Right.
And so if we can get our language to be turned to something that's more empowering and not victim or stuck, which I feel like the word resist embodies.
Absolutely. That's so funny. It was exactly what I was going to say was the, the quote about Mother Teresa. And I saw something earlier today about a group. I'm not sure which one it was, but they were having a problem with the media calling them like an anti or a hate group. And it was interesting how, they didn't want themselves to be labeled that, because they absolutely are aware, of the power of the that nomenclature of it being labeled as that. I mean, it changes the whole atmosphere. So what are some different things, like for you personally, that Trump really triggers in you?
Yeah. Exposure. Well, one of them was the bullying that he does. And I really had to do some deep work there to see where have I either bullied someone else, or I stood by and watched and said nothing when someone else was being bullied. Both are have equal
power.
Yeah. Whether you were doing it or watching it. And then the one that really hit me is, how have I bullied myself over the years? Of that pushing, that, you've got to get it right. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And, name calling and, treating ourselves as we wouldn't treat anybody else in the world sometimes as bad as we have treated ourselves in our lifetime. And that's one that really stands out for me.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's so funny how you and I are thinking so much. So the minute you say something, I think it, and then you say that as your next as your next point. And, what that brings up for me is, being a white male in America. I've learned the hidden racism and the hidden bigotry and perhaps the hidden bullying that's inside of me. You know what I mean? And that's something that I've really tried to start coming to task with is, we have this idea, I go to the Unitarian Universalist Church, and I'm part of the LGBTQ, and I'm embracing of all colors and creeds and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, there are hidden places in yourself where you do have these sort of like ideas. Like if you were to place two people side by side, of a different nationality or something like that, which one would you just automatically go to without knowing anything else about them? It's just kind of very interesting to start asking those questions. Why is that? How am I programmed to do that? Because I've certainly met people that have met the criteria for being people that I would find subconsciously acceptable, who in the long run were not that acceptable. And then of course the ones that my subconscious probably were triggered and like, you need to be careful on that person. They turned out to be one of the most kind-hearted, welcoming people in the entire world. So I don't think that method necessarily really serves us. And you see it so much, nowadays, people really reacting. It's interesting. The other day I was, I work at a car dealership, and a couple came in, and it was the first time I'd ever seen it here in South Alabama, in the South, rather. I live in Alabama, and this woman was in the full, I'm going to call it the wrong thing, and I mean no harm when I say that, but she was in the full outfit, the woman, from like the Saudi Arabia or wherever, with, all you could see were her eyeglasses, literally. Everything was covered. And I thought to myself, that is really bold. Number one, I respect however she wants to dress. And of course, there were lots of people around me that, privately were saying things. But I thought, number one, that takes a lot of guts. And number two, I was kind of like monitoring how I was reacting. And luckily there wasn't a whole lot coming up, but I just thought it was very interesting, to see somebody, actually exercising, I guess it would be part of her faith,
Sure.
There. And, I thought it was just, this is probably just an aside, but the salesmen were kind of talking about how they've been on they've been on test drives with women like that, and they're one of the most aggressive drivers that there are. So you might see them as very kind of cowarding and that kind of thing. And I wonder, I don't know if that comes from a point of having to exercise their boldness, or if they simply know that they need to know how to defensively drive in case they have to get away from something. Or, I don't know, I'm kind of asking an open-ended question there. It's kind of like hanging it out there. What do you think?
Yeah.
And I'm probably taking us down another rabbit hole, which I'm really famous for. So, but I think it is about us really kind of, monitoring that intolerance we have for people that perhaps aren't like us, and especially even in the LGBTQ market when you hear somebody coming forward and, gosh, I didn't know that we caused hurricanes, and I didn't know we were that powerful that we cause earthquakes and tornadoes, and, and I mean, we could look at it as either being really kind of, affronted by that, or I take it as, gosh, I must be pretty darn important for them to speak not only of me, but to put me in the place of where, because of me, that's happened. I'm thinking I'm pretty darn powerful. What do you think, Cara?
Absolutely. That's so funny.
Yeah.
But we have so many of these things that we see about Trump that, we're going to talk about. But can I just run down a list high level, and then we'll go back and talk about them so that they're all. One of the topics, well, I'm just going to run down the list: racism, narcissism, exaggeration, bullying, being egotistic, misogyny, dodging the draft. Where do we get rid of people that we don't agree with? Impatience, intolerance, unable to admit that you're wrong. How do we react in situations when we're unprepared? Putting up walls, how do we do that within our own self? Thinking of the other as the enemy, passing over people who are different than you. So those are some of the things that we're wanting to discuss today. And I know we've told a few stories here, but I just wanted to give our audience a little list of some of the things that we feel that all of us have inside of us, a piece of it. It may not be to the same degree or extent, but we can at least find something within us of where we have embodied our inner Trump.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. I had sent to you, and I'm sure you probably see it there, that Fox News poll. And Fox News would probably, I would say, arguably is the news organization that is most on Trump's side. And I'm not trying to pick sides here, but it's really interesting how their poll found, I thought, some really pretty incredible statistics of how those people really thought of Trump himself. I mean, 53% of them think of him as a bully. 44% think of him as unstable. Only 35% of them consider him competent or a strong leader. 32% think of him as a problem solver. Even only 25% of them think of him as presidential. So what is it, and I'm really not trying to make it partisan at all, but what is it that perhaps makes people feel like they have to bring somebody there in office? It's almost like, to me, what's happening is people at any cost are trying to find change. And that to me is a kind of a frightening thing. Not what change they're trying to make, but that people at almost any cost are trying to make change. Because, I mean, you can always have change. It's really easy to tear things up. I mean, kind of like the idea of, if it takes you 10 hours to build a sandcastle, it takes you about 5 seconds to tear it down. So you can tear things down all day long pretty quick. But what is it you're trying to build? You know what I mean? And I think that's important for no matter where you lie on the spectrum of politicism or how you think society should run. Because as we're staying in this sort of like childlike kindergarten fight over who's right and who's wrong and who's good and who's bad, what is really happening in the world? Where we're really going? I mean, what is getting done? I mean, we're arguably at a time, I think, where we have the most power and the most ability to change people's lives. I mean, we literally have enough natural resources and enough food resources, enough energy resources to feed and clothe and house and keep every single human being alive right now today in comfort. And we're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so I think, I really think if you really get down to the core of it, all of us have the same basic wants, needs, and desires. And it's interesting how people sort of like think that there's like this, you know, I don't know if anybody follows Abraham Hicks, but the idea of there's this one pie, and if somebody gets too big of a piece of pie, there's no pie left for me. But when actually this is a natural, abundant universe, and there's just
Mm-hmm.
pie, you know. So I like I say, that's why I don't really want to find too many answers today. I really kind of want to ask more questions to get people to really, you know, wonder what is it, because the only thing that you can change is yourself. You know, the only thing that you can change is what you pay attention to. You know, none of us can really drive up to the White House and at, you know, Pennsylvania Avenue and knock on the front door and change anybody's mind, or go to Congress or the Senate and tell them what they should. I mean, we can try, but, you know, what we really truly have power over is what we think, believe, and see and know, and really kind of push forward into the universe. And I think that's really, for me, is what the crux of what we're doing today is to do some self-discovery, to find out and to realize, to really be mindful of the fact that, you know, if something is triggered in you, if somebody triggers something, then that's something you're triggering in yourself, and to really be able to look at that. So we've listed everything, and probably ad nauseum everybody knows all these things. I mean, I think both sides know it. So let's start talking about, because you have so many different dynamics that you work with Reiki and shamanism, and, you know, having been a minister and having been in the pharmaceutical company, what do you see are some different ways that people can change their mindset, change their programming, you know, their subconscious programming, to where they can start maybe letting go of these, I mean, even letting go of the idea of bullying Trump himself, you know, and really see how can I move forward and make change, you know, because we are part of Project Positive Change, and we want to bring positive change to the world. So how do you see it that we can start working on that?
Yeah, well, it's doing your own personal work, you know, and you need other people, whether it's healers or a therapist or Psych K, something like that. There has to be somebody outside the frame of the picture, because when you're in the picture, you can't see the whole thing, right? So it's wonderful to have teachers, mentors, individuals that can help facilitate your walk, your healing. For me, you know, I use many different healing modalities, you know, making sure that, you know, the energy centers, number one, are flowing and functioning. If they're not flowing and functioning, you can't take in information. You can't, you know, see things as clearly. These wheels, these vortexes, actually bring this energy and feed our organ systems, you know, our whole health. The other piece is, a lot of people have dealt with a lot of trauma. You know, people think there's some kind of like hierarchy of trauma. There's really not. Trauma is trauma. And so working with people right where they are, in their trauma, their pain, their hurt, their grief, right? The biggest piece is to make connection with people, like a heart-to-heart connection. Most of the time, people want to be heard. You know, they're not being heard. You know, they've had every test in the world, and the doctors still don't know what's wrong with them, right? And so the doctors just kind of push them off to the side. They want somebody to believe them. And working with the mental, emotional, spiritual, as well as physical, I know there's more to us. And I know the majority of the diseases and conditions and sickness is mental and emotional. A lot of it is stress related. You know, when the cortisol is up in our system, we're in fight or flight, right? And so all of the blood rushes out to our extremities, and it's not in our brain, and it's not in our stomach, it's not in our immune system to keep us healed. So that's where I see, you know, the majority of disease and conditions come from, is that stress level that we hold. And when you look at everybody, they've got 4 devices going at the same time: email, Twitter, Instagram, email, everything going on at the same time, plus have a full-time career, plus have 3 children, plus, have a household or whatever to run. And there's just so much stress. It's not surprising to me. The other thing is obviously getting the right kinds of foods, non-GMO, which that's a whole nother story, a whole nother show, right? But yeah, working with people where they are, being in contact, they have to acknowledge that piece in themselves, that there's something out of an alignment for them. What's keeping them stuck? What's keeping them sick? What's keeping them stressed? And actually going down into that. And part of my health history, which a lot of offices don't even ask, I have a huge section on trauma and past trauma in your life. I even have a scale that says, how happy was your childhood? Extremely happy to, I don't know how I survived it. That tells you a lot, right? If they have a whole list of all this abuse they went through, and yet they're saying that their life was pretty darn happy, there's a total disconnect happening there, right? Where they're not even aware of it. Sometimes when people have been through so much trauma, they consider it normal. I always question people that say, and I used to be one of them, oh, I have a real high pain threshold. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that they've been numbing out, right? That it's gotten to such a level that the new normal is way up here, right? And so I listen for key words of what they say, and especially if they use a lot of always and never, there's a limited belief behind that, and we'll work with that.
It's interesting. People use that high pain threshold as almost a point of honor. Yeah. Like, I'm proud of it. I'm proud that I have disabled my body's system to allow me to know what danger is.
It's true. It's true.
And I love that. Yeah. Cause there is, and that's something that's probably going to be a great show even for the holidays, is this whole idea of what is family, and because that gets kind of deep, about the idea of, you hear so many people, you hear how they work with their relatives, and then you hear the story behind what they really think of their relatives. You're like, wow, that doesn't really seem to mesh too much. But anyway, that's another topic. We've got plenty of shows in us people. So, well, I think that's wonderful. And it's really about exploring your own inner scape to really, change the outer scape. And, that, I think that's really the common message that we're, bringing forth here. And that, the way to make positive change is to really start with yourself, like Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. You start with the one you see right there, because that's the one you have the most control with. And I think we always want to, have a Trump on a stool that we can kind of throw darts at, rather than saying, that it's anything inside of me. It's all them. And I have no play in this. I have no part in that. And like I say, that puts you right into the victim mode. And then how many facilities you have for changing that.
Absolutely. But when you think about Trump, how many people are now getting involved? How many people are now calling their congressman? I don't know about you, but I've been asleep in politics my whole life until now.
Right.
And it's like, oh my gosh. And so people are starting to take action instead of being asleep at the wheel and just like, well, that's just the government and that's how it is. It'll be over in 4 years, 8 years, and just ride it out. And I think that's what I love about Trump. He has been a catalyst for waking up and like saying, no, this isn't right. And I don't like how he's treating these people, and, or whatever it is for you, that it gets you involved. I think that part of it is a godsend. So
I totally agree. Because I think for the LGBTQ community, it had gotten to where we were getting so many of our rights we're going through. I personally was wondering why we were still having Pride, and now I know why. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it is. I think it's making people really, looking, it's making people really, decide who they are in themselves. And for those that it's important, it's making us begin to speak up. I think that's what's been missing in a lot of the elections, is that so many people were just disengaged, because they either thought it was just naturally kind of going that way, or they didn't feel any personal involvement. And it's kind of the idea of, Nazi Germany, where, first they went for one group, and then they went for another group, and then they went for another group, and then there was nobody left. You know what I mean? So, and you can, I mean, if you just kind of consciously look at it, you can kind of see that, where you start taking out each group, and before you know it, you come down to just the humankind, because we're all connected in some way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, do you want to go through some of the list here and see how it shows up in our everyday life?
I think we can. We're good. I think we've gone pretty far. So let's, if you want to go through kind of quickly on that.
Yeah, I was just thinking a couple of things that we had written down, around racism, how it shows up. It could be in our thoughts. It could be in jokes that you tell, or you've heard growing up. It could be flags that are flown. It can show up that way. The narcissism of somebody really, putting out there, their craving of attention, like he has done in so many different situations, of saying, well, I have a winery in Charlotte. I know what Charlottesville's like. I have a winery there. I have a big house there. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did that fit into the tragedy that happened there, that he needed to go to? I have a house there. It's a nice house. It's a big house. It's one of the best wineries. Yeah.
Right.
So then we have the exaggeration. There's a lot of, it's going to be great. You're going to love it. It's going to be huge. Just in my family, I remember my brother saying, when my sister would talk, whatever she says, just divide by 2, right? Like, because it was just in her to exaggerate. We had talked about bullying a little bit, of doing it or watching or to yourself. But how about as siblings, bullying each other, the youngest or the oldest or the shortest or the tallest, and using sarcasm. Sarcasm is a really slick way to bully. Misogyny, of discounting women. And, I've been in conversations many times where, women would be wanting to interject into a conversation that some guys were having, and they wouldn't even be acknowledged that they're even standing there, let alone turn and look at them to see if what they had to say was, of value.
Right.
Impatience. I know mine is in driving, the grocery store line, and the post office, right? How about you? Any?
Oh, impatience. It just kind of, yeah. I mean, I'm always having to like sort of listen to very mindful music and kind of keep myself in that state, or I can get to, and I drive a Prius and I can still, I can get a little intolerant myself. So I have to, kind of stay in that space, because it's kind of that thing where you always laugh at the people that have to be first in line, and before you know it, you're stopped right next to them at the red light, and you're like, gosh, you sure went through a whole lot to do that, So
yeah. And then there's that negative pleasure, if you can, the person who's darting like this, if on the highway there, you can get them trapped for like 10 seconds between 2 semis, good times, right? So we all have pieces like that, right?
Right. And I think what you were talking about, with bigotry and racism, I think what's been really helpful for me is to kind of do a gut check. If somebody of a different color walks in, or somebody of a different nationality or creed, or perhaps they wear their hair in a way that, might trigger you, or something like that, just kind of check in and ask yourself the conscious question of, what am I thinking right now?
Yeah.
What's happening right now inside me? Not saying it out loud, but just kind of asking yourself, and then asking yourself the question of why. I mean, why is that so? The Byron Katie question of, is it true? And just really explore those things, because I know that since I've really opened myself up to that, I've discovered that like I say, people that, I would have subconsciously thought were okay. I find, people that I'm really more in line with, that I would have normally been triggered by. So I think it's really, important for you to just kind of ask that little question yourself. And that's really
Yeah.
my aim for this show, is for people to start to really kind of ask that question. But we've been on almost an hour. Are there any kind of final thoughts that you have, Cara, before we go today?
Um, let's see.
How can people contact you?
Yeah, great, great. Cara at journeystothesacred.com. I do both in-person and distant healing work, and I'm running 2 spiritual retreats next year. June to Peru and going to the sacred sites of Machu Picchu, Lake Titicaca, and a few other sacred sites there. And then Spain, walking the last 70 miles of the El Camino. And we'll be looking at different aspects of your life that you want to shift and change, whether it's career, relationships, health and well-being, creative expression. And so I'd love for you to join me on those trips.
Nice. And if anybody out there is interested in Project Positive Change, we would like you to really send a message there to the message board, and we would love to see if you're a great fit. We're looking for people that are really trying to bring new change in. We have a lot of visionaries there that do lots of great work. For me personally, the best way right now to reach me is on Facebook at the Angel Encourager, or through my name there. Do authenticity coaching and healing. Would love to help anybody that's out there. And I would love for people to really just comment, on this post here. This will be on a Facebook post and probably a few other places. Make a comment. We're going to be keeping up with that and coming back. And if there's some things here we should revisit, we might come back to it later. So for now, I'd like to say, really thank you, everybody, for watching us here, embracing your inner Trump on Pushing the Edge show here with Cara Andershock and myself, Pete Cossaboon from Project Positive Change. I'm hoping that you find the change maker in yourself, and we're here to help you any way we possibly can in that. So for now, we'll say bye-bye.
Bye.